The Kennedy family became one of the most powerful political dynasties in American history. A young president, a glamorous first lady, a name that represented wealth, influence, and power. But behind every dynasty, there is a foundation. And behind the Kennedy dynasty was a woman whose story has often been overshadowed by the famous people she helped create. Her name was Rose Kennedy. She was the mother of John F. Kennedy, the woman who raised a future president, the woman who helped shape the values of an entire family. But behind the photographs of success and the image of a perfect American family was a private reality far more complicated. Because Rose Kennedy did not simply build a dynasty. She paid a personal price for creating one. She lived beside a man whose ambition helped transform the Kennedy name into a national force. But ambition often demands sacrifice. And the question history still asks is, what did Rose Kennedy have to give up to help create the family that would change America? Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy was born in Boston in 1890. She was raised in a world where politics was not something distant. It was part of everyday life. Her father, John Francis Fitzgerald, known as Honey Fitz, was a popular Boston politician who eventually became mayor of the city. From a young age, Rose learned that a family name carried power. A reputation could open doors. Connections could shape the future. And public image mattered. These lessons would stay with her, because years later, she would become one of the most important people behind one of America's most famous names. The Kennedys. When Rose met Joseph Kennedy, she met a man who shared her understanding of ambition. Joseph was intelligent, confident, and determined to rise far beyond ordinary success. He was not satisfied with simply becoming wealthy. He wanted influence. He wanted respect. And most importantly, he wanted his family name to matter. In 1914, Rose Fitzgerald married Joseph Kennedy. At first glance, their future appeared almost perfect. A young couple, a growing family, a promising future. But history often looks very different behind closed doors. Because Joseph Kennedy was not only building a business empire, he was building a legacy, and Rose Kennedy would become one of the people responsible for protecting it. Joseph Kennedy believed that success was something a family could build across generations. Money alone was not enough. A true dynasty required education, discipline, connections, and ambition. The Kennedy children grew up surrounded by expectations. They were taught that their opportunities came with responsibilities. They were not simply expected to succeed. They were expected to achieve something meaningful. And that belief shaped every child in the family. But one child would eventually carry the Kennedy name onto the world stage. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. When people look back at JFK's rise, they often focus on his charisma, his speeches, his confidence, his ability to inspire millions. But presidents are not created overnight. They are shaped by the environments that form them. Joseph Kennedy gave his children ambition. But Rose Kennedy helped create the discipline and identity behind that ambition. She taught them the importance of education, faith, family, and responsibility. She believed the Kennedy name represented something larger than personal success. It represented a duty, but there was a hidden cost to building such a powerful family. The same expectations that created greatness also created pressure. The Kennedys learned how to present strength to the world. They knew how to appear united, confident, unbreakable. But behind that image were real people facing real struggles. And this is where Rose Kennedy's story becomes far more complicated. Because she was not only the woman who built the family, she was also the woman who had to live inside it. Joseph Kennedy was often away because of business and political ambitions. Over the years, historians have written about his relationships with other women. These accounts became part of the complicated history surrounding the Kennedy marriage. But the most important question is not simply what Joseph Kennedy did. The deeper question is, what did Rose Kennedy choose to do with the reality she faced? Because walking away was one option. Protecting the family was another. And Rose chose the path that would define the rest of her life. Rose Kennedy lived in a time when marriage carried different expectations than it does today. Religion, family responsibility, social pressure, and reputation all played powerful roles. She was a deeply religious Catholic woman. Her faith shaped how she understood commitment and duty. But there was something else even more powerful. Her children. The Kennedy children became the center of her world. She invested her energy into raising them, teaching them, preparing them, and creating a family identity that would last far beyond her own lifetime. But Rose's sacrifice was not only about staying in a difficult marriage. It was about constantly choosing the family over herself. The world would eventually know the Kennedy name, but Rose knew the private moments behind that name. The pressure, the expectations, the responsibility of maintaining an image. And perhaps the hardest part, knowing that the family she was building would belong partly to the public. Not just to her, because when a family becomes a symbol, its members stop being seen only as individuals. They become representatives of something larger. And Rose Kennedy understood that better than anyone. She was not creating a normal family. She was creating a dynasty. But every dynasty has a cost. And Rose was the first person who had to pay it. But the greatest influence Rose Kennedy had was not building wealth. It was building people. She understood that money could create opportunities, but character determined what someone did with those opportunities. And she wanted her children to believe that their family name came with responsibility, not just privilege. That belief would shape the Kennedy family for generations. John Kennedy grew up surrounded by two powerful forces: his father's ambition and his mother's discipline. Joseph Kennedy taught his children how to compete, how to succeed, how to reach higher. Rose Kennedy taught them something different. She taught them how to represent something larger than themselves. She believed that a Kennedy should not simply benefit from success. A Kennedy should serve. That idea followed John Kennedy throughout his life, from his early political career to the moment he entered the White House. But there was a contradiction at the center of the Kennedy family. They wanted the world to see strength, but strength often required hiding weakness. They wanted to represent perfection, but behind every photograph was a more complicated reality. And Rose Kennedy understood that contradiction better than almost anyone, because she spent decades protecting the image of a family that was never as simple as it appeared. In 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy became the youngest elected president in American history. Suddenly, the Kennedy family became something bigger than a political family. They became a symbol: the young president, the elegant first lady, the beautiful children, a new generation entering the White House. The world saw hope, youth, energy, a fresh beginning. Later, people would call it Camelot. But Camelot was not created overnight. It was built over decades. And Rose Kennedy was one of the people who created the foundation. However, the same family culture that created success also created enormous pressure. The Kennedys were expected to win. They were expected to stay strong. They were expected to overcome anything. But behind the public image were private struggles. And Rose Kennedy would experience some of the deepest pain a person could face. She watched her children achieve extraordinary things, but she also watched them face extraordinary challenges. The family she spent her life building would bring her both incredible pride and unimaginable heartbreak. This is what makes Rose Kennedy's story different from a simple success story. She did not just create a powerful family. She carried the emotional weight of that family. Every victory belonged to everyone, but every tragedy was felt personally. She was not only the mother of future leaders. She was a mother who had to watch those leaders face dangers and pressures that most families never experience. And this is the part of Rose Kennedy's story that is often forgotten. People remember the Kennedy name. They remember the presidents, the elections, the famous photographs. But dynasties are not built only by the people standing in front of cameras. They are built by the people working quietly behind them. The people who create the values, the expectations, the identity. Rose Kennedy was that person. Years later, when Jacqueline Kennedy entered the Kennedy family, she stepped into a world Rose had already helped create. A world where public image mattered, where family reputation carried enormous weight, where private struggles were often kept away from the public. Jackie Kennedy would later face questions about her own marriage, questions about loyalty, love, sacrifice, and why she stayed. But years before Jackie faced those questions, Rose Kennedy had already lived inside a similar reality. The connection between Rose and Jackie is one of the most fascinating parts of the Kennedy story. They were different women. They lived in different generations. They had different personalities, but both became connected to powerful men whose private lives were far more complicated than the public image suggested. Both had to navigate the difficult space between personal life and public responsibility, and both became part of a family where the world was always watching. But Rose Kennedy's legacy cannot be measured only by the challenges she endured. It must also be measured by what she created. She raised children who changed American history. She created a culture of ambition and service. She helped transform the Kennedy name into one of the most recognizable family names in the world. And she did it without ever holding public office herself. Her power came from influence, from guidance, from shaping the people who would stand in the spotlight. History often focuses on the person at the center of the stage, the president, the leader, the public figure. But behind many powerful people are individuals whose influence is quieter, less visible, yet deeply important. Rose Kennedy was one of those people. Her marriage was complicated. Her family was imperfect. Her life was not a fairy tale. But perhaps that is exactly why her story matters. Because real history is not created by perfect people. It is created by people making choices inside difficult circumstances. People balancing duty and emotion. People deciding what matters most. Rose Kennedy did not build a perfect dynasty. She built a powerful one. And those two things are not always the same. The Kennedy family changed America. But behind that transformation was a woman who understood the price of ambition. A woman who protected a name. A woman who shaped generations. A woman who helped create the family behind one of the most famous political stories in history. When the world remembers John F. Kennedy, it remembers the president, the speeches, the White House, the legend. When it remembers Camelot, it remembers the image, the elegance, the dream. But behind that dream was Rose Kennedy, the woman who helped build the dynasty. And the hidden story behind JFK's family was never only about power. It was about sacrifice. It was about choices. And it was about the private cost of creating something the entire world would remember. Subscribe to Historic for more untold stories behind American power.